Sometimes a human being slowly drifts into a life they never consciously chose, a life where their value becomes measured not by who they are, but by how much they can give, how often they can be available, how reliably they can solve problems that are not their own. And this transformation does not happen loudly or suddenly, but quietly, through small decisions repeated over time, through each yes that was spoken out of fear rather than intention, through each sacrifice made in the hope of approval, until one day the person realizes that their life feels crowded yet empty, full of people yet devoid of peace. And this is where Daniel found himself, a man who genuinely believed that kindness meant unlimited access to himself, who believed that being good required being endlessly accommodating, and who never paused to ask whether a good life must also include self-preservation. Because Stoic wisdom tells us that virtue without reason becomes imbalance, and imbalance eventually becomes suffering. Yet Daniel had never learned this distinction, and so he lived in a small town where everyone knew him as dependable, helpful, generous, and kind, not because they understood his character, but because they understood his availability, and each request reinforced a silent agreement that his time was communal property, that his energy belonged to whoever needed it most urgently. And Daniel accepted this agreement without negotiation, without reflection, and without realizing that by doing so, he had placed his inner stability in the hands of people who were never responsible for protecting it. And as the days passed, his own life quietly deteriorated, not because he was lazy or incapable, but because all his strength was spent outward, leaving nothing for repair inward. And this is the Stoic tragedy of misdirected effort, when a person works endlessly, yet builds nothing for themselves, and returns home each night, not just physically exhausted, but emotionally hollow, carrying a fatigue that sleep alone cannot cure, because it comes from misalignment between one's actions and one's nature. And when Daniel's mother questioned who would help him if he always helped others, he dismissed the question with optimism rather than clarity, believing that kindness would one day return to him in equal measure, not realizing that Stoicism warns us never to depend on the moral awakening of others for our peace, because expectations placed on uncontrollable outcomes are seeds of disappointment. And when the storm arrived, it was not merely a weather event, but a symbolic reckoning. Because while others protected their own foundations, Daniel once again abandoned his, proving through action what he had long refused to admit through thought, that he valued others' stability more than his own. And sitting in the aftermath of destruction, he felt not anger, but a profound emptiness, because the pain was not caused by loss alone, but by recognition. Recognition that he had participated willingly in his own neglect. And Stoicism teaches that suffering intensifies only when we deny our role in it, but transforms when we accept responsibility without self-hatred. And this acceptance led Daniel to seek wisdom rather than validation, to listen rather than complain. And through a simple metaphor of a river, he finally understood that even generosity must obey structure, that flow without boundaries becomes chaos. And this realization unsettled him deeply, because it challenged the identity he had built his self-worth upon. And when he began practicing restraint, when he began delaying his responses, when he began asking whether an act of help would cost him his peace, he encountered guilt, resistance, and fear, because change always threatens the comfort of familiar suffering. Yet Stoic philosophy reminds us that discomfort is often the price of growth. And as Daniel redirected his effort inward, repairing his home, his life, his responsibilities, he discovered a form of strength that did not depend on praise, a calm that did not require permission. And when no one came to help him during his own moment of need, he did not collapse into bitterness, because Stoicism teaches self-reliance not as isolation, but as sovereignty. The understanding that your stability must never depend entirely on others. And as weeks passed, something unexpected occurred. The world adjusted, not because Daniel demanded respect, but because he embodied it. Because boundaries quietly instruct others where you end and they begin. And through this transformation, Daniel learned the central Stoic truth that peace is not found in being indispensable, but in being aligned, not in endless giving, but in intentional giving, not in being needed, but in being whole. And when he reflected on whether saying no had cost him anything meaningful, he realized that what he had lost was exhaustion, resentment, and self-neglect. And what he had gained was clarity, dignity, and inner balance, because Stoicism does not oppose kindness, it refines it, teaching us that true generosity flows from abundance, not depletion. And this realization belongs not just to Daniel, but to anyone who feels drained by their own goodness, who confuses self-erasure with virtue, and who is slowly awakening to the understanding that protecting your time, your energy, and your peace is not an act of selfishness, but an act of wisdom. Because only when you stop abandoning yourself do you finally begin to live in accordance with reason, nature, and truth.